We'll get into some Husker football topics here, Bryan, too. Dana Holgorsen news in just a minute here. But some news over the weekend was a decommitment from the Nebraska football class in wide receiver Bryson Hayes. He's going to Kansas now. How long has this been on the horizon? What went into his decision?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to kind of summarize what's been happening here, but I think we have kind of been hearing that something might have been on the horizon now for a few weeks. Where, Bryson hasn't been back for, I don't know if he was back for any games this fall, number one. And I think that also, some people kind of wanted to point at the kind of season that he was having production wise. I think everybody would agree that they didn't have a lot of luck with that quarterback. They didn't have a quarterback really to kind of help them out. He had a couple of really nice games to kind of finish the season out. But I think, in the end, what really happens here is that, Nebraska has, I think under Rule, maybe one of the first times ever, they've kind of successfully been able to kind of recruit over guys in the same class. And that's always a danger, right? That's always something to be fearful of. And the good news for Bryson was Kansas was really turning it on pretty hard to keep him home. And I think that as time kind of went along and things kind of started to swing a certain way, that maybe there wasn't a great opportunity there in Lincoln. He had a great opportunity with underneath Coach Leipold and Lawrence. He is going to be he's going to definitely be successful. I don't think anybody's sitting here telling anybody that he's a bad player. I don't think that's the case at all. I feel like the way that Nebraska's kind of filled up the class, maybe some other guys they have on the hook, or they're trying to get on the hook, like Michael Terry, for example. It could be a sign that Nebraska's really, really got some things brewing with a guy like Terry or other players, at that position. Jordan Allen is another guy that we've talked about before, the Louisville commitment. He's not been interested in kind of taking a visit yet because it's going to definitely complicate his commitment there, as well as the season that he's having at Buford. So I think that maybe there's another name or two out there for Nebraska still at the wide receiver position, which could make this all very much more an easier thing to understand here in the coming weeks.
Nebraska's new offensive coordinator was a wide receiver at one point, has coached wide receivers before. That's Dana Holgorsen. Bryan, go back to last week. You hear the news that Nebraska is bringing him in just to get eyes on the offense, and then all the way through today, when in his opening statement, Matt Rule announces Dana Holgorsen is the offensive coordinator for the remainder of the season, and Matt Rule hopes in 2025 as well. How have you processed and digested this news for the Huskers?
I think what it tells me is that Matt Rule is not interested in waiting around and trying to win next season. I think he wants to win right now. I mean, I think he understands that, he's a win away from getting a chance to go to a bowl game, which is something Nebraska hasn't done in a very long time. And I think that from the feedback, and I just got done wrapping up the press conference, so it's still pretty fresh. I think from the feedback that he received from Holgorsen about the things that needed to be fixed and what he could do terminology-wise, make it very easy to kind of assimilate it and move forward. I mean, I think USC is going to be a tough test. You go on the road, you're a 9.5-point dog. And I think it's obviously you always kind of look at these games and teams that have been kind of down that Nebraska's going in there to play against, and all of a sudden Nebraska kind of just gets beat up a little bit. There's always that kind of rebound game against the Huskers for some reason. It always happens, but I think what you're really focused on is a couple, 2-3 weeks down the road where you get a chance to play against Wisconsin and play against Iowa. I think that both of those games are the most winnable games left on the schedule. You need to get into your offense as quickly as possible, figure out what's going to work, what's not going to work. I think that you're dealing with this other situation, obviously, with, getting Raiola back into practice. He's clearly beat up. You're going to have to get Heinrich ready as well. I think what they've done is they've made a commitment to this team. They are not going to wait around to make a change. They feel like they've got winnable games yet on the schedule, and that's fantastic. I think people should be fired up about that. The Rule is not willing to go ahead and just sit around and take the losses and work something out with Holgorsen later on and maybe make other adjustments to his staff. He's doing it right now. And I think that's I think that's very admirable. I think people would say a little risky, but I think at the same time, I think the riskier move would have not making any adjustments, thinking that you can just all of a sudden go out and beat one of those three remaining teams and get bowl eligible. That's probably a riskier proposition at this point.
Was this a panic move, or is this a let's avoid the sunk cost kind of move?
No, I think the panic side is getting a little bit overblown, because from what I got listening to Rule, he's a sensible fellow, and I think he was more like, convince me the right thing for me to do right now is to bring you in here and allow you to become the play caller after you've not been in the building, 2 weeks before. How is it that all of a sudden you feel like I can make this adjustment, and all of a sudden you can just lead this offense? Tell me how, explain it to me, the process. And I think he has a pretty decent, opportunity to kind of leverage a previous relationship, with Dana. I think that's huge. It's not like he's just somebody off the street, so I think that there's a relationship that kind of is there. I don't think Dana would pull anybody's chain, especially Matt's, when it comes to this. So yeah, I think that this has been a well thought out deal to where, that Dana feels like he can go out there and put the pieces in the right order and be competitive. And I think that people should be extremely fired up about that. In particular, the guys on offense that they know that they have been struggling, and that they're willing to try something new and going at it and attacking it this week, in practice, and then taking it out to Los Angeles on the road against a formidable opponent.
Bryan, people still seem to think that, Dana Holgorsen's going to come in and change a lot, right? Now, not in 3 weeks. That's not how it's going to happen. Matt Rule said it multiple times that it's not going to change, at least for this year. Right. But then moving forward, right, if Dana Holgorsen does decide to stick around, if he is the offensive coordinator long term, we're getting a lot of comments, too, about how if you can't establish the run, it's not going to be effective. Another pass-first offensive coordinator, Whipple light, you're playing in the Big Ten, this and that, which, okay, fine, fair. But, Bryan, I think there's two sides to this coin. Number one, is Nebraska a program that has to see what the Big Ten is doing and fit into that, right? Play the same style, but just be better at it than everyone else? Or is the other option true, where Nebraska just needs to be good enough at running the ball, just good enough at playing defense, and find a way to zig where the rest of the conference is zagging based off what they can do with their coaching staff and how they're able to recruit or not recruit?
Well, I've heard two former head coaches in the Big Ten say we're going to make other teams adjust to us. And those two head coaches are no longer in the conference. And that was Rich Rod and Scott Frost. And I think that there's an identity to Big Ten football. I think it is definitely a conference that deals around running the football first and having an ability to run, but also being balanced. It's not Nebraska in the 90s, and then again, it's not Army. It's not Navy. So it's got a flow to it that starts with physicality, and having game breakers, however, definitely helps you. But you can go out there with monsters and eat up yards, in 3 or 4, yard bursts, if that's what you want to do all day long. And that's what you want to try to do. You're going to win some games doing that. You're going to definitely win the time of possession. But that being said, I think what your listeners are saying, I really kind of agree with. I think that you are unable to, in this conference, completely give up on the idea of running the football. You have to be able to set it up. But I think that that's where Holgorsen and what he's going to do, and this is just me kind of, spitballing this thing, right? I think he understands he has to get short, and he has to understand, the slants and the glances, and he's going to have to get into some sort of an RPO style, and he has to loosen some things up, and he has to make those guys, open up some things there up front to where they could have some success running the football. And I did feel like, there were a couple of times that Nebraska was able to kind of go out there and get after him. I thought Nebraska ran the football okay in the second half against Ohio State. What changed? what are the things that kind of change at that point? And I think the other thing that Holgorsen, could bring that I haven't been necessarily all that, impressed with so far has been, potential for any type of adjustments. I don't think that there had been any adjustments. And I think that that's one thing that maybe Holgorsen is going to find a way to kind of work around, how the defense is kind of, what they're given to him. Maybe because it wasn't because they felt like that was what they were going to do it in the first, not how the game planned, but he can roll with making some adjustments, as the game is kind of going on. That's always very key to me. I have felt like that is the key to being successful. You have to be able to make those in-flight adjustments. And if you can't do it, it is square peg, round hole all day long. And so that's going to be an interesting thing for me to see how that kind of happens and how he kind of tweaks some things to have some success, from drive to drive.
It is kind of funny too, because with the air raid, kind of moniker and tag that's applied to him, people forget that the air raid started in Iowa with Hal Mumme and Mike Leach, and that's where Dana Holgorsen is from. So, I mean, Hal Mumme and Mike Leach obviously took it, a step further, but Dana Holgorsen's from Iowa. He's familiar with Big Ten football, coaching at West Virginia, not exactly, Palm Beach, Florida, or Southern California, where, ironically enough, Bryan, Nebraska is heading out this week. When you look at Nebraska's coaches, being on the road, how often are they in California? How big a priority is California for this staff, maybe compared to some more recent Husker staffs?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's happened in pockets. Nebraska, they have TJ Lateef on the commitment list, for this season. Some of their bigger targets, for next year, are out in California. If you think about like a running back like Brian Bonner, for example, who has been in two times so far this season from Valencia, California. Brandon Arrington from Mount McGill, California, been there in July, talking about still trying to get back for the Wisconsin game this fall. I know that they're trying to cherry pick, and I think it just kind of comes down to maybe not necessarily having, the right kind of approach yet out there. I think that they have an ability to kind of cherry pick it, but they don't have that ability, like treat it like the radius yet. And they don't really have a way to kind of treat that area as an extension of the Big Ten footprint. They haven't really adjusted that way. I think Nebraska's new identity so far has been to kind of, build up things from the inside out. And it's kind of been really working the border, the border states and into the radius states. Clearly, they're still trying to find ways to knock down doors in Florida. They must feel like Florida is still a much better place, a more promising place for them to kind of go get guys because of the committee of coaches that went down there, last week to kind of go do some recruiting. And I don't think that they really have, somebody there yet in that position on the staff that is kind of the guy with all the connections there. I think they're still trying to figure out how they're going to do it, but I think that they feel better about what they're doing in South Florida, but I don't think you'll ever find a Nebraska that's not interested in recruiting California. It's just, it's happening at more of a cherry pick versus like the overall, shake the tree and take everything that falls. So I think that's kind of the way I would kind of summarize that.
I like it. That's Bryan Munson of Husker Online with us here. Bryan, you are a military veteran, correct?
I am. I'm a Nebraska Army National Guard. I was in the infantry from 1993 to 1999.
Well, thank you for your service, Bryan. A happy Veterans Day to you. Thank you for what you did when you served then, and of course now with us on the block. Thanks a ton, man. Appreciate it.
I really appreciate that, guys. Take care.
All right, bro.